Good afternoon. Ever since the mid-19th century, when the United States first developed free universal public education in the form of common schools, we have debated what should be taught in our schools and how we should teach it. The controversies over the Common Core are simply the latest chapter in a long volume of what one educational historian called education wars. In a democratic and pluralist society such as ours, this debate is both inevitable and necessary. Education is the process by which we socialize and enculturate our youth. The content of what we teach and how we teach it is a statement on who we believe we are and how we came to that identity. And perhaps even more importantly, it is a statement on who we aspire to be. Education is our declaration on what we believe it means to be an American. While the language arts, mathematics, and science all involve different and important aspects of American identity, no subject is more central to that identity than social studies and history, and in particular, civics. In the United States, civics is education into citizenship in a republic founded on the ideal of rule by its citizens, the we the people that announces itself as the ultimate authors of the American Constitution at its very beginning. So civics goes directly to the heart of who is and who is not a citizen of the United States, directly to the heart of what rights and what duties those citizens possess. It goes directly to the question of power, the power of ordinary citizens, not elites, in how we rule and how we are ruled. It should be a matter of no surprise, then, that the fiercest contests over the content and method of American education have taken place in civics, social studies, and history. Our ability to find common ground in the teaching of civics cannot be separated from our ability to find common ground on what it means to be an American, both as a matter of history and as a matter of aspiration, from our ability to find common ground in how we understand American democracy itself and what we want American democracy to be. Finding common ground in the teaching of civics is therefore an unavoidably political process. If there was any doubt that this was the case, consider that the current renewed interest in the teaching of civics has clearly been generated by the undeniable crisis in our civic life and the extraordinary dysfunctionality of our political institutions. As we have done in the past, Americans are now looking to our schools to help solve deep social and political problems not of the school's making. Given the debased form of politics that is currently practiced by American elites, the pursuit of private interest at the expense of the common good, and the paralysis of government ruled by a logic of narrow partisan advantage, the debased politics that have led so many Americans to view politics with disdain and disgust, the debased politics that have created the crisis of our civic institutions. It is only natural that many educators, even teachers of civics, would approach the idea that there is something intrinsically and unavoidably political about finding common ground in civics with some trepidation. I understand well the fears of my fellow civic educators that lead them to try to find ways to circumvent the political in the promotion of civics. And yet, the attempts to reach decisions on what we teach and how we teach it with purportedly neutral technocratic approaches have a track record of undeniable failure. Consider the Common Core. While a good portion of the problems the Common Core experienced were around its execution, which was done in a top-down technocratic style that defined education reform in the No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top eras. An approach without regard for teacher voice and without the provision of time and resources for teachers to learn how to use new and challenging standards. That was not the only problem. The attempt to circumvent political considerations in the development and promotion of the Common Core only resulted in a debate where the terms of that debate were increasingly set by those employing the politics of, to borrow Richard Hofstadter's turn of phrase, the paranoid style. To use a metaphor from psychoanalysis, when one attempts to repress the political dimension of decisions on standards, curriculum, and pedagogy, it reasserts itself from the unconscious in the irrational language of the political id, in wild accusations of conspiracies and the like, completely untempered by any element of the political superego. How else to explain a public debate that centered on such claims as Obama is forcing the Common Core on us to turn our children gay? There is a political dimension to all of these questions, even to the claim that the decline of American civilization began when we stopped teaching the Palmer method of handwriting in our schools. Although that is a claim that is perhaps better reserved for the bar when one has had a few beers. The task before us, I would insist, is to approach the question of the common ground of civics with an understanding that it necessarily involves the political, but to not do so in the form of the current debased politics that is used in America, where every question is reduced to an issue of private interest and partisan adventure. Rather, we must do so through a classical conception of politics as the pursuit of the common good. Debates over civic education start with the question of pedagogy. Although it is not widely known outside of the rank of social studies educators, the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers commissioned a set of social studies standards for the Common Core. They became known as the 3 C standards: education, for college, career, and citizenship. One of the failures of the Common Core was that in the face of the controversies generated by the language arts and mathematics standards, the NGA and CCSO abandoned the C3 standards, and the Common Core was reduced to college and career. The National Council for Social Studies published those standards, but to my knowledge, not a single state has adopted them, in part because they were already one state. In part because they are already finding ways out of any connection to the Common Core. It is instructive, nonetheless, to reference the debates over the C3 standards as they go straight to the question of pedagogy and civics. The C3 standard centered on what is known as the inquiry process in education, one in which students actively engage in and take ownership of their learning by defining and pursuing the issues to be studied. In the world of civics, the inquiry process most often takes the form of what is called action civics, in which students identify a civic problem they want to address, study its nature, its origins, its possible solutions, with a particular focus on how government or civil society in some capacity could be part of that solution. For example, students may look at an instance of environmental pollution in the community in which they live, figure out what caused it and what might remedy it, and what different parts of government or different institutions of civil society could promote that remedy. They conclude by engaging those actors who can address the problem. This approach has its critics, perhaps most prominently Checker Finn. In Finn's eyes, C3 was focused entirely on the development of civic skills at the expense of civic knowledge. In this view, civics should be about instructing students in foundational documents of American democracy, such as the Declaration of Independence and the Gettysburg Address, and the constitutional basis of American government, but should not be promoting civic activism on the part of students. At the level of pedagogy, it is possible to see this skills-knowledge dichotomy in civics as a false binary, and to find common ground that embraces both poles. Civic learning involves both civic reading, in which one learns the language of civic life, and civic writing, in which one uses the language of civic life. It is only through writing, through the active use of civic language, that one makes that language truly one's own. As Danielle Allen has so masterfully explained, students need to study a document like the Declaration of Independence, not just because it is a historical founding document of American democracy, but because it sets forth the political language through which American politics and civic life are enacted. The language of the Declaration is evoked again and again in American history by those seeking to stake out their claims that I too sing America, as Langston Hughes put it so well. The abolitionist, the suffragist, the labor organizer, the civil rights activist. For students to become civic actors, to become full democratic citizens, they must know and use that language. They must make the language of the Declaration of Independence their own and use it in the pursuit of their own civic objectives. And yet, I know that some will not be satisfied with this reconciliation of a pedagogy of skills and a pedagogy of knowledge. That is because the pedagogies function, in many cases, as proxies for deeper political points of view. We live in a political era when voter suppression is widely practiced, advocated, and legislated for no other reason than it provides partisan political advantage to one set of political actors. The notion that American citizens can be denied their most fundamental right and duty, the vote, does fundamental damage to the first principles and the very foundations of American democracy. There is, I fear, an equivalent of voter suppression in the realm of civics education, a stance which sees partisan disadvantage in students, especially students from communities that have been historically disempowered and denied meaningful access to political and economic decision-making, in those students becoming active democratic citizens. To the extent that an approach to civics insists that schools not develop civic skills and civic capacity, that civics focus on citizens as the ruled and not part of the we the people that rule. And to the extent that it teaches students to obey and not question authority, it is engaging in an educational form of voter suppression. It cannot be part of the common ground for civics education. So, my friends, I do believe there is a common ground in civics education, but it is a ground shared only by those who have a deep and abiding commitment to an American democracy based on liberty and justice for all, in which we the people, all the American people, in all of our rich diversity, rule ourselves.
Thank you so much, Leo. Well, you all took my cue without even getting the cue, which is that after such terrific presentations and to generate a little movement, let's give everyone a round of applause. Yeah.